The matter of faith. There have been men, many of them, who claim to be a new Messiah. And tonight we're going to meet 3 of them, including one in the faraway Philippines who has amassed a flock, he says, numbers in the millions. Poor people who give what little they have to the man they believe is the second coming of Jesus. Bill Weir journeyed there to meet him.
Throughout the Bible, prophets, angels, and Jesus himself all promised that the Son of God would return to create heaven on earth. And throughout the ages, billions of Christians have wondered, when? But what if the second coming is here, now? There are a number of would-be messiahs who claim exactly that, and few are more physically convincing than a former Russian traffic cop named Sergei Torop. In the woods of rural Siberia, he is known as Vissarion, the teacher, and around 5,000 disciples live around him, growing their own food and feasting on his every word.
My whole body was trembling. The trembling is not coming again. Well, it's very emotional to me.
Meanwhile, in London, David Shaler says he is the true Lord of Lords, but unlike Vissarion, no one believes him.
That doesn't bother me because I was chosen by God.
The former British intelligence agent says his body was filled with the Spirit of Jesus in 2007, a conviction which intensifies on a visit to Jerusalem.
We're in the Church of Holy Sepulchre, and this behind me is supposed to be the tomb of Christ. Well, I'm Christ, I'm not in the tomb, I'm not dead yet.
But with no support, he lives in a squatter's camp outside London.
My agreement with Jesus, I don't ask for money off people. If you're the Messiah, you shouldn't be asking for money, you should have faith that God will look after you.
Prove to me that you are a son of God.
But that is not a sentiment shared by Pastor Apollo Quiboloy, the most successful of the world's self-labeled saviors.
The official coming of the Son of God was in April 13, 2005.
He was an obscure evangelist from the rural Philippines until 2005, when he announced that God had appointed him Christ on earth, his reward for a pure life.
Sinful thoughts, anger, lust, any of those things, you don't experience those on a daily basis?
As a human being?
Yes.
I have already overcome all of those.
There is no apocalypse in Quiboloy's message, no rapture or final judgment. Instead, he preaches that he is the model of Christianity, and as more people follow his example, God will gradually turn the earth back into the Garden of Eden.
Do you perform miracles?
For me, the greatest miracle is the changing of that spirit within.
But healing the sick, the manifestations of Jesus' powers, you're able to do that?
We have healing.
You are
healing and miracles happening.
After taking his place as the appointed son, Quiboloy's ministry has exploded. He claims to reach 6 million followers with his satellite TV network, numerous publications, private jet, and personal helicopter. All the better to avoid the bumpy road and impoverished villages that lead to the walled compound he calls the Kingdom of Jesus Christ. Here is his 5-bedroom home, surrounded by manicured gardens of imported grass.
So this is your Garden of Eden.
This is what we call the Garden of Eden restored.
It's easy to see why this claim resonates in a country where 30 million endure crushing poverty with open hearts. This family lives just down the hill, next to the dump where Pastor Quiboloy's garbage is burned.
If you could be anything in the world, what would you want to be?
Go to heaven.
To them, heaven really could exist inside Quiboloy's gates, and it's why hundreds line up to carry his parasol. All the workers who toil in the grinding heat of the kingdom are volunteers, here to glorify the Father.
Do you get paid for this?
Juju tells me he gets $40 a week to feed his family. Minimum wage. And like the rest of the kingdom, he's expected to give 10% back to Quiboloy.
This may be the most beautiful spot in the Philippines, and it's paid for by people who live on $2 a day. So how do you justify your lifestyle I mean, your watch could probably feed 100 families for a month.
If it's not God's will for me to have these things I have,
Yeah.
you can take it away. It is God's will that we follow. If it is God's will for us to live like this, you know, you can have a broken heart looking at me, but what can you do?
But they get their understanding of the will of God from you.
Yeah.
And this nice young man wouldn't be holding this umbrella if he didn't believe the things you say.
For us here, we see everything as a ministry. My talent is to preach. My talent is to be a leader. Not everyone can become a preacher or have been given a talent like me to go and lead the 6 million people.
Right. But Jesus, when he walked the earth, according to the Bible, lived among lepers and prostitutes.
I live among them.
You have a private jet.
I live among them. Before I had the private jet.
You're in a walled compound with mansions.
Before this, I lived among these people. Like, for example, that jet that you're talking about. Do you know that in 1983, I had a revelation of that jet? That the Lord is going to give me that.
Yeah?
It is Him who gave me that. If it is not His will, how can I afford that?
Well...
Kibeloy has been accused of kidnapping and brainwashing by the parents of at least one of his followers, but he was never charged. He insists that anyone is free to leave his flock and seal their fate for eternity.
Will they go to hell?
It's up to them. They know that. So that's your will, you know. If you want to go to hell, no one will stop you. If you want to go to heaven and follow this way, no one will stop you too.
Come work with you.
Yeah.
There are three possibilities here. You are either the Son of God, or you're delusional, or you're a very successful con man.
I respect your point of view. But I resent what you said, that your followers will say, I'm a con man with a speaking ability that I've tried to con people. That is not who I am. I'm not trying to con people. I am speaking the truth.
Skepticism is a cross all modern messiahs must bear. In Siberia, Vissarion has also been accused of mind control, but there's not enough evidence to try him. And David Shaler? Well, there are fewer legal headaches for prophets without followers, but still plenty of moments to bring a so-called Son of God back to earth.
Do you think you're Jesus?
Sorry?
Are you Jesus?
I am Jesus, yes.
No, you're not.
I'm Bill Weir for Nightline in Davao, Philippines.
Can we have some quiet?
No shortage of skeptics, no shortage of believers. The Second Coming premieres next Wednesday on the National Geographic Channel.
Tensions are running high between China and India. This week, soldiers from the two countries brawled along the border, leaving at least 20 dead. The dispute is over a contested area in the Himalayas. The two neighboring nuclear powers have fought over the border before, but this was the first time in close to 6 decades that anyone has been killed. As Mike Armstrong reports, both countries are calling for de-escalation, but they're not backing down.
This was a message. Video of Chinese military drills in Tibet released this week. The goal of the operation, according to reports, to test their soldiers' capabilities fighting at a high elevation. The goal of releasing the video is to tell its neighbor, India, it's ready to fight at a high elevation. The two countries came to blows this week in one of the most inhospitable, unforgiving, and highest regions in the world. Now, there is no clear demarcation between the Indian-controlled and Chinese-controlled territories. The border is usually called simply the line of actual control. Even some of the lower plateaus are at an altitude of 5,000 meters, a height that affects everything from the human body to weapons and vehicles. Now, hundreds of soldiers from the two companies have been stationed basically facing off across that line for months. There's been fear of a flare-up, and Monday it happened.
As you can see, some soldiers being injured.
According to reports, it would have been similar to this brawl in 2017. No shots were fired. Soldiers fought instead with fists, rocks, and bats. According to India, 20 of its soldiers were killed. There have been funerals throughout the week. Indian officials say there were casualties on both sides, but China has not confirmed that, instead saying only its soldiers were on site for negotiations and were attacked. This foreign ministry spokesperson says Indian troops crossed the line, provoking Chinese soldiers and triggering the brawl. While there are calls on India to retaliate for the loss of life, protesters burned the Chinese president in effigy. There are also calls for boycotting Chinese products. For the Indian Prime Minister, who was re-elected last year in a campaign focused on national security, the pressure is building. India wants peace, the Prime Minister says, but if provoked, will provide an appropriate response. The two countries in 1962 fought a month-long war over the disputed border. Hundreds of soldiers on both sides were killed. Tensions have simmered for decades. The two countries were scheduled to hold trilateral talks this coming Tuesday with Russia. Despite the dispute, Indian officials say they will participate. Mike Armstrong, Global News.
The remains of all 6 Canadian soldiers killed in a helicopter crash have now been recovered. 4 of the members killed were positively identified by Ontario's chief coroner. They include Sub-Lieutenant Matthew Pike from Nova Scotia, Master Corporal Matthew Cousins from Ontario, Captain Maxime Morin from Quebec, and Captain Kevin Hagan from BC. The remains of Sub-Lieutenant Abigail Cobra and Captain Brendan McDonald were identified just after the accident. The military says the bodies will be released to the families over the coming days. The members were killed when a Cyclone helicopter crashed during a training exercise off the coast of Greece in April.
Tonight, new details emerging on the escalating military tensions between the U.S. and Russia. As Pentagon officials game out a response to Russian aggression in Europe, Vladimir Putin is now making some serious moves in the Caribbean. Our Brian Todd is all over the story for us. Give us the latest, Brian.
Wolf, tonight, Putin is on America's doorstep with nuclear-capable bombers that can fly at twice the speed of sound. It's a bold move right out of the Cold War as the Russian president tries to establish a military foothold near American shores. A Russian bomber with an impressive wingspan touches down at America's doorstep. The Tu-160 has to deploy parachutes to slow down. Russian pilots, decked out in helmets and orange jumpsuits, climb out to a hero's welcome. 2 of these bombers, nicknamed Blackjacks, are in Venezuela tonight. Vladimir Putin has deployed these warplanes, along with 2 support aircraft, to conduct exercises over the Caribbean with Venezuelan forces. A worrisome development for Washington, considering the capability of the Russian bombers, which can fly twice the speed of sound.
This bomber was designed to do both high altitude and low altitude penetration of airspace with nuclear weapons, to deliver nuclear weapons on target. This aircraft was designed to be an offensive capable weapon to get into our airspace during the Cold War.
The deployment comes on the heels of Putin's recent military aggressions against Ukraine on land and sea, and countermoves by U.S. forces. Analysts say Putin is sending an unmistakable signal to the United States tonight.
He's clearly trying to send a message to the United States that he can play in our backyard and that Russia maintains significant military capabilities.
Another concern tonight is the Cold War-style alliance of 2 strongmen who are both antagonists of the U.S. Putin and Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, who visited Moscow just last week. Experts say U.S. military and intelligence officials are closely watching the Putin-Maduro partnership and how it may work against American interests close to American shores.
They have a close military relationship. Russia does provide Venezuela with significant military support. Usually with these close military relationships, a close intelligence relationship is part of that.
The Russian deployment comes as Venezuela is deep in crisis, triggered by plummeting oil prices, crippling economic mismanagement, and violent protests against Maduro. U.S. officials tonight are skewering Putin and Maduro. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo tweeting, "The Russian and Venezuelan people should see this for what it is. 2 corrupt governments squandering public funds and squelching liberty and freedom while their people suffer." Putin's spokesman fired back.
It's probably not very appropriate to make such statements when you were a country with a military budget so big that half of it could feed the whole continent of Africa.
Analysts say none of this will stop Vladimir Putin from once again trying to gain a Russian foothold in America's hemisphere.
Putin has made it very clear through his actions and through his commentary that he intends to reestablish Russia to the level of influence of the Soviet Union.
Now, just a short time ago, Venezuela's foreign minister leveled his own broadsides at the U.S., calling Mike Pompeo's tweet, quote, disrespectful and cynical. He pointed out that it was President Trump who publicly threatened military intervention against Venezuela. Now, analysts say we can expect military cat-and-mouse games to continue while those Russian bombers are deployed in Venezuela. They say U.S. forces will almost assuredly send out surveillance planes, possibly vessels, to shadow the Russians and Venezuelans. Pentagon officials will only tell CNN that they are monitoring these exercises. Wolf?
And Brian, that will potentially give the Venezuelans and the Russians some intelligence of their own, right?
Absolutely, Wolf. Experts say as U.S. planes and ships monitor these joint Russian-Venezuelan exercises, and the Russians and Venezuelans, well, they're going to gather intelligence on the Americans, on their spying and shadowing capabilities, and try to figure out how to evade them. This is the kind of cat and mouse that goes on, but it can turn dangerous in a blink.
Israel has been carrying out more airstrikes against militants in the Gaza Strip after its targeted killing of a top Palestinian commander overnight. Israel says Baha Abu al-Atta of the Palestinian militant group Islamic Jihad was behind a series of rocket attacks on its territory. Palestinian militants responded by firing rockets at Israeli cities, including Tel Aviv. Citizens across southern and central Israel have been instructed to stay inside. It is one of the worst escalations of violence on the Israel-Gaza border in years. And for more on this story, we can speak to journalist Hazem Balusha. He's following this in Gaza City. Hi, Hazem. Thank you for joining us. Can you bring us up to date on what's been happening at the moment there in Gaza?
Well, as you mentioned, today was a day of exchanging firing rockets from Gaza. Tens of rockets were fired from Gaza into the Israeli cities, reached Tel Aviv, but most of it was to the nearby cities. The Israeli jets and air forces targeted many places, mainly military sites, and some of some people, no faction claimed responsibility or announced anything, but apparently they are those people who are, according to Israel, they stand behind firing rockets. So since the morning, Gaza is a different day. It's out of sudden. There is escalation after years of quietness. Schools, government institutions, and banks are closed today in Gaza.
Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he did speak earlier at a press conference. Let's listen now to what he said about the killing of this Gaza militant.
In the past year, this arch-terrorist was the main generator of terrorism from the Strip. He initiated, planned and carried out many attacks. He fired hundreds of rockets at communities in the Gaza periphery, whose suffering we haven't ignored. He was in the midst of plotting additional attacks these very days. He was a ticking bomb.
So we heard the words there, a ticking bomb. You know, how significant was he?
Well, I mean, actually, it's weird how this name become in the top news. Actually, the name of Baha Abu al-Atta appeared like a couple of months ago, as Israel accused him of standing behind firing rockets into Israel, precisely at when the rockets fired when Netanyahu himself was giving a speech in a city of Ashdod before the elections. He's not the top leader of military wing of Islamic Jihad. He's not the first person. He's one of the commanders who's as Islamic Jihad said, he is the commander of northern region in the Gaza Strip. The talks and the people started to talk about him since the Israelis started to accuse him of standing behind the rockets fired into Israel.
And it has now led to this, as you said, significant escalation. Hazem, where do you think this is heading?
Well, this is a hard question to answer. It's too early to say that if there is going to be a fourth war. It depends, actually, to be honest, on the Hamas reaction. Hamas is the biggest power in Gaza, and it's the biggest military capabilities in Gaza. If they joined the retaliation and they responded and firing rockets into Israel, it might go broader and bigger. But if Hamas, which is more willingly, according to the analysts, that will give the opportunity to Islamic Jihad to respond and fire rockets, which means that this would be limited, and it will has an end within a short time, maybe days, maybe hours, we don't know.
All right, journalist Hassan Balusha speaking to us from Gaza City. Thank you very much.
न रुके न थके न चुके और आज दोबारा आ गए.
The game pretty much changed in those first 40 minutes.
It's what you do after failure that defines who you are.
Walking the streets of the future is really going to be breathtaking.
Though the coronavirus pandemic was relatively slow to hit many developing countries, the World Food Program warns the outbreak could cause widespread famines of biblical proportions. A report by the UN organization estimating the pandemic could nearly double the number of people facing starvation.
But now the World Food Program analysis shows also, due to the coronavirus, that an additional 130 million people could be pushed to the brink of starvation by the end of 2020. That's a total of 265 million people.
The WFP suggests the economic repercussions of the pandemic, including widespread lockdown measures, coupled with the virus itself, will push struggling nations over the edge. The report cites 10 countries already afflicted by conflict and economic crisis as the most vulnerable, including Yemen, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Afghanistan, and South Sudan. Even prior to the outbreak, East Africa and South Asia were already facing critical food shortages because of drought and record locust infestations. But experts stress the worst-case scenario is not a foregone conclusion, insisting coordinated global action can still mitigate the effects of the pandemic. The World Food Program estimates, however, it will need $350 million immediately, but only a quarter of that has thus far been secured.
Tagreed Hassan barely has the strength to cry. She's 12 years old. Her fragile body, like Yemen's plight, is a horror beyond words. The trauma of severe malnutrition has taken its toll. Her tiny arms are so thin, the doctors say she's lucky she's still alive. But in the face of the world's largest humanitarian crisis, they're desperately trying to cope.
نفس جهاز الشفط، الأكسجين، أنبوبة الأكسجين، وبعض العلاجات الهامة، نفس المهدئات، علاجات الحمى، هذه ليست متوفرة بشكل كامل.
For months, Yemen's children have paid the highest price in a war now in its third year. Zara is 15. This is what hunger has done to her. And now a cholera epidemic is spreading, with more than 5,000 cases every day. At Hodeidah Hospital, they're overwhelmed by cholera victims. More than 40% of those affected are children. Yemen was already on its knees, but now a disease which should have been left in the 19th century is in every part of the country. In the villages, this waterborne infection is claiming lives, as one father who lost his 4-year-old son Ali told us. In the nearby clinic, Tagreed is finally receiving help. Her father Ibrahim says they're doing all they can.
وبنتي تحتاج إلى أي مستشفى، تبغى لها أي مستشفى الخارج أو كذا، وأنا ما عنديش استطاعة حق ما أسافر بها. والآن أعالجها على قدر الاستطاعة، على قدر الإمكانية.
Across Yemen, hunger and cholera cast the darkest of shadows. One aid agency has called this country's suffering a shame upon humanity.
Hey NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.
Officials say at least six people have been killed after a powerful earthquake in southern Mexico. The epicenter of the quake was located near the Pacific coast in the state of Oaxaca. The tremors knocked out power and caused severe damage in some areas. Pavements wobbled hundreds of kilometers away in Mexico City.
Standing on shaky ground and feeling the earth swaying beneath one's feet. Shock waves from a powerful earthquake brought towns and cities across Mexico to a halt. Residents flooded the streets, seeking safety on shifting pavement. It was very strong. I had never felt such a strong earthquake, only in 1985. Today's earthquake felt very, very strong. We were so afraid. It was pretty severe. And with COVID-19, you think, what's next? Hospitals were affected too. But while medical staff and patients were evacuated, those suffering from the coronavirus remained isolated inside. I felt how the bed was moving. I was sleeping, and then I saw how the curtains, everything was moving. The quake hit at a time when Mexico is already reeling from the coronavirus pandemic, which has claimed more than 22,000 lives so far, Latin America's second highest toll. But the tremor's effects could have been much worse. Mexico's president announced that the country's infrastructure suffered no serious damage, but he warned citizens to remain cautious. After the strong 7.5 earthquake, there have been 147 aftershocks. So they recommend that we remain alert and attentive. But while feeling the aftershocks, some Mexicans preferred appealing to a higher power.
Se cayeron edificios. Se cayeron edificios.
Este edificio se movió horrible, horrible. Tronó horrible. Que se salgan, la pared se rompió. Que se salgan. Que se salgan, se va a caer. Se va a caer. Dios mío, Dios mío, Dios mío, Dios mío. Dios mío, Dios mío, Dios mío, Dios mío.
No mames, está cabrón, güey. ¿Qué pedo? Pues eso está muy cabrón, güey.
No.
Mírame la cantidad de edificios que se cayeron. No lo puedo creer.
No, impresionante.
Pues yo vi uno cayéndose aquí, güey, ahí al ladito. No puede ser.
Don't let yourself be convinced to do something that you know is bad, and then Ian finally just shared with us. Cover your mouth with your shirt. Everybody okay? Stay underneath.
This supervision is much more intrusive, it's much more intensive.
1 in every 3 Christians in Asia are suffering from a high level of persecution. That's according to a new report by the UK-based Christian advocacy group Open Doors. Its 2019 watch list report ranks these 4 Asian countries among the top 10 where persecutions of Christians is most extreme. North Korea tops the list for the 18th straight year. The report says there have been increased efforts by the government to eliminate all channels for spreading Christianity. The report also highlights the continued persecution of Christian minorities in Afghanistan and Pakistan, which are predominantly Muslim. And for the first time, India has broken into the top 10 of the watch list due to a rising numbers of attacks on Christians and churches by Hindu extremists. China is also on the list, ranked at number 27 this year, a dramatic rise from its position at number 43 in 2018. The report says, according to some church leaders, persecution in China is at the worst level since the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s and 70s. Other Asian countries on the list include Myanmar, Vietnam, Bhutan, Indonesia, and Malaysia. To talk about this, I'm joined from the United Kingdom by Ron Boyd-Macmillan. He's the Director of Research at Open Doors International. Now, one particularly interesting finding was that there has been a significant increase in the persecutions of Christians in China. What examples can you give about that from the past year?
Perhaps one of the most significant shifts is that responsibility for the supervision of religious activity has shifted to the party organization called the United Front Work Department and away from a government department that was called the Religious Affairs Bureau. That's been done away with. Now this supervision is much more intrusive, it's much more intensive, and it's a way of making sure that all religion, not just Christianity, has to serve the ideological goals of the state. And under President Xi Jinping, since 2012, churches are finding that they get visited a lot more, and there are requirements, to basically tell the government everything you are doing. And this is a bit new because things were liberalizing quite significantly over the last 10, maybe even 15 years. But this is a complete reversal.
Ron, I want to see if you can tell me a little bit more about the situation in Indonesia.
There are religious extremists, Islamic extremists, and so you have churches that are targeted, and there was a horrible incident where a family went and blew themselves up in a church in Surabaya and killed Christians. And of course the governor of Jakarta was a Christian, and he was smeared really by Islamic extremists a couple of years ago, and has been serving a 2-year jail sentence because of that. So it's rather unfortunate. Indonesia used to have a reputation of being very tolerant of all the different religious traditions. This is shifting.
It's no surprise that North Korea has been top of the list for nearly 2 decades. How has that situation worsened despite Pyongyang's efforts to engage with the West?
Internally, there isn't really much change. Many of us wonder really why there's any mileage for Kim Jong-un in talking to Donald Trump, but maybe it's just a survival mechanism. But inside the country, it's just as hard to be a Christian as ever before. It's not tolerated, it's not allowed, and if you are discovered to be a Christian, it usually means jail, and then your children will also be jailed as well.
Is there any solution to this? I mean, in terms of stopping this kind of persecution across Asia and other parts of the world?
You can pressure the governments. You can pray. Very often what they do is when disaster strikes, for example, in Anhui province, there were floods this year, the churches are the first to help and assist. And that impresses the government and often changes their attitude toward the church, where they see that the church can really be an ally in dealing with the challenges of society rather than a rival.
Great insight as always, Ron. Thank you so much for joining us today on SCMP.
Thank you for taking an interest. Bye-bye.
Christian persecution in some parts of the world is, quote, close to meeting the international definition of genocide, with Christians being targeted by extremist groups in the Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, and East Asia. For more on this, we bring in the president of the Iraqi Christian Relief Council and senior fellow of the Philos Project, Juliana Taimoorazy. Juliana, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me on, Molly.
It's really startling to see that sort of figure, that takeaway from the report, that it could potentially be reaching genocidal levels. Also worth noting from this report, 80% of religious believers who are being persecuted around the world are Christians. Should this be a wake-up, a worldwide wake-up?
Absolutely. There has been a genocide that is already underway and perpetrated by ISIS. As you know, Secretary Kerry announced this as a genocide of the Christians of Iraq and also the Yazidis. But this has been going on for so long. For example, in terms of Iraq, the Assyrians, also the Chaldeans and the Syriacs of Iraq have come under persecution starting 2003 until today. Our numbers were 1.5 million today, down to 200,000 people. And look at Sri Lanka, look at what happened there, look at what's happening in India. Nobody's really talking about India. So we're grateful for Secretary Hunt and also Ambassador at Large Brownback for really stepping up to do something in a positive way, in a more meaningful way. But There's so much that needs to get done still worldwide. According to Open Doors report, 1 out of 9 Christians, Molly, across the world are being persecuted today.
And of course, this causes not just potentially death, as we're talking about genocide, but also people being pushed out of their homelands, and the religion where it perhaps had a stronghold being forced out of areas where Christians lived. I want to take a listen. This is the British Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt speaking in Kenya.
Around 250 million Christians being persecuted, 3,000 losing their lives last year alone, and that's increasing. And there are many different reasons for that. Religious conservatism, politicians playing on people's religious prejudices, state-sponsored oppression, terrorism.
He also talked about political correctness. Do you think that plays a role?
Absolutely. Actually, I believe the death of most of the people that are suffering today is truly because of the political correctness, because the world turns a blind eye to this. And when we are politically correct, we are sympathizing with those terrorists that are destroying communities and erasing histories. For example, the Assyrian people in Iraq, our history, they're trying to erase our history by destroying our monuments and really pushing out us from the homeland. But you know what, Molly? Persecution looks different in different parts of the world. For example, let's take Iran. According to the International Christian Concern, they did a report. In 2017, there were 16 former Muslims that were persecuted. But in 2018, 171 former Muslims, and also 3 Assyrians that are being persecuted today, Pastor Victor and his family, for example. In Egypt, they are giving the Christians a hard time to legalize churches. We saw what ISIS did in Sri Lanka. So the way we answer every persecuted situation, it has to be different. For example, Boko Haram in Nigeria. We have to deal with them differently.
And perhaps these horrific attacks in Sri Lanka also will be seen as a wake-up call. Juliana Tamarazi, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ryan Higa, and I'm currently attending the University of College State, where I'm majoring in political correctness, so you know that I know what I'm talking about. I can tell you exactly what is considered offensive and what isn't. I mean, I've taken all the classes on political correctness, such as Facebook Comments 101, Twitter Trends 102, to Wikipedia. I've even taken an advanced class on the subject called Reading News Articles that other people write to tell me how I should feel about controversial topics 205. And with my vast knowledge on this subject, I'm going to be teaching you how to be the most politically correct you've ever been. It was offending me. Welcome to How to Be Politically Correct. For those of you who don't know what that means, being politically correct, or PC, basically means to avoid offending people. Because we all know that offending someone's feelings is the worst thing a human being can do. So let's get started. The first lesson in being PC is to avoid the trendy topics. If an issue is trending on social media or talked about on the news, chances are you should probably avoid that topic, because all of a sudden everybody really cares about it now. And no matter which side you pick, you're probably gonna offend someone. Here's an example of a trendy, controversial topic that you guys might remember. Can you believe this?
What?
This is Starbucks Christmas cup.
So?
So, there's no Christmas on the cup. This is a blatant attack on my religion. A blatant attack on Christianity. Plus, the cup is red. That's the same color as hell. And the devil, and fire, and pimples that are not ready to be popped yet. Well, I think they're right for not putting Christmas on the cups.
What did you just say?
Well, I'm not a Christian, and if they did have Christmas designs on the cup, then that's infringing on my First Amendment right of freedom of religion. How dare you say something so un-American? Un-American? The vast majority of Americans in this country Constitution clearly states.
Guys. Just a cup.
How dare you try to step on my religion? See? It might seem like a silly, petty argument, but since it was trending in the news, it's really important now. If you really want to be PC, avoid the trendy topics. This is what he should have said.
Guys. It's just a... Never mind. No comment.
You know what? You're worse than both of us. Yeah. By keeping quiet, you're part of the problem. You're not doing anything to help. This painting is so offensive. I don't know why. The next lesson in being PC is no more jokes. Jokes are a thing of the past. I mean, you might think that some jokes are not that bad, but in 2017, all jokes are offensive.
Hey, you want to hear this joke I just read?
Okay.
All right, so 3 guys walk into the bar, right?
Oh, 3 guys, huh? Didn't know you guys were against women's rights.
What?
Why do they have to be guys?
They don't.
Well, then it's sexist. Why are there no women? Women go to bars too.
Yeah, I know.
Dude, it's just a joke. Oh, it's just a joke? What, women aren't funny enough to be a part of your little joke?
Okay, fine. It doesn't really matter, okay? 3 Women?
Good.
Walk into the bar in the middle of the day, right?
The middle of the day, wow.
What is it now?
Now you're saying all women are alcoholics, you bunch of misogynists.
Hey, why did the duck cross the road?
Why?
To prove he wasn't chicken.
Are you implying that all chickens are cowards? Or that somehow ducks are above chickens in some way?
What?
Because ducks and chickens are equal, okay? And people like you who support duck supremacy are part of the problem.
What are you talking about? I don't see how this is offensive.
Yeah, of course you don't. You don't see it because you're a little privileged duck boy that grew up in the safety of your little ranch. So of course you're not afraid. Chickens, we grow up in fear. We get drugs, GMOs forced into us at the mills. We're forced to watch each other get slaughtered just for food.
Hey, ducks get eaten too.
Yeah, they do. But tell me, how often do you come across duck eggs at the supermarket, huh? How often do you pass by a fast food chain called KFD? You see, all bird lives do matter. But right now, chicken lives. Those are the lives that are in danger. And that's what's trending.
What do you call someone with no cell phone?
I don't know what.
A house phone. Because with no cell phone, you gotta call them with a house phone.
As somebody who finds Jonah Hill and Michael Cera's comedy inappropriate, I take offense to that joke.
What? They never even said this joke. How is this even related to either of them?
Because it was super bad. And finally, the last lesson in being PC is for you to know that everything is offensive. If you don't think that something is offensive, chances are you're a bad person and you're not looking hard enough. Here, let me make it easy for you. I'll give you some examples. Now take a look at this X-Men poster. Does it offend you at all? Because if it doesn't, you hate women. It's clearly showing a man choking a woman. So that means you think that it's okay for men to choke women. Not to mention at the top of the billboard, it says only the strong will survive, implying that men are stronger than women. But that's not it. This poster isn't just sexist, it's racist. I mean, why is the light-skinned blue person choking the dark-skinned blue person and not the other way around? Take a look at the date on the bottom. Don't tell me it's just a coincidence that they conspired the release date to be on May 27th, the exact same day that the race riots in East St. Louis took place in 1917. And as if that weren't enough, the title itself is not just sexist, it's a hate crime. I mean, the title of the franchise is X-Men. Why not X-Women? I'll tell you why, because X-Men Apocalypse is an attack on the LGBT community. That's right, X-Men stands for transgender. They're X-Men. They used to be men, now they're women. So they're X-Men. So when they say X-Men Apocalypse, what they're really trying to say is that this is the end of the world for the transgender community. I will not stand for that. I will remain sitting. I will not. Wait a second, May 27th. This is old news. It's not trending anymore? Yeah, it's no big deal then. Next. So in closing, I know there's a lot of things to remember, so I'm gonna simplify it and try and wrap everything up. In order to be a truly politically correct person, avoid all the trendy, controversial topics. Which basically means that if something is being talked about by somebody somewhere about something, you may not have an opinion about it because you're wrong and it's gonna offend someone. You must also remember, no more jokes. Jokes are a thing of the past. So remember to never laugh or make anyone else laugh, because if you do, that means you're laughing at the issues. Issues like war and rape and racism. So if you laugh, you're a racist war rapist. And last but not least, and most importantly, everything is offensive. It's not rocket science. If you don't want to offend others, it's simple. Don't have opinions, don't take any action, don't walk, talk, move, wear, or share anything you're thinking about, especially if it's about an issue. And everything is an issue. And at the same time, keep in mind that with all these issues, if you don't speak up and take action, you guys are part of the problem. So stop having opinions, stop taking action, and step up and do something and take action.
Cut. What? No, it's not you. The video is great. The message is clear. It's just we're missing something. I don't think we're gonna get the views this way. Unless... Hi, I'm Ryan Higa, and I'm...
Racism in the time of pandemic. A young woman wearing a mask is attacked in a subway station.
Come here. Sanitize your Come here.
An elderly woman is chased by a bully trying to squirt hand sanitizer on her. Harassment and assaults against Asian Americans are up sharply.